Good morning. I cannot claim credit for what you just saw up there. That goes to Laura, our head of marketing, who is an evil creative genius. So we are going to go on a journey today. And we are going to look at what we can learn from deeper incident analysis. And you've heard a lot from people today of ways that you can do these things, outcomes that you want to have. It sounds terrifying, I think, I'm sure. But what I want to do today, my goal today, is to show you that this is possible and to encourage you to continue to do this work. And so in order to start that, we're going to have a little parable about the journey we're about to go on. But the audio is not working.
We've demolished the land behind us.
Can we back that
now,
one up?
little ship,
Okay.
look out.
We're going to try again. Make sure the audio goes.
We have forsaken the land and gone to sea. We have destroyed the bridge behind us. More so, we've demolished the land behind us. Now, little ship, look out. Beside you is the ocean. It is true, it does not always roar, and at times it lies there like silk and gold and dreams of goodness. But there will be hours when you realize that it is infinite, and that there is nothing more awesome than infinity. Oh, the poor bird that has felt free, and now strikes against the walls of this cage. Woe, when homesickness for the land overcomes you, as if there'd been more freedom there, and there is no more land.
Does anybody know what that is? You know it's Nietzsche. All right. Winner, winner. That's impressive. That's the horizon of the infinite. I owe Nick Travellini the inspiration for that. After I told him about my talk, he said, "Ooh, this is what you need." And I said, "You're absolutely right." And what I love about this piece is I've played it for, I don't know, 4 or 5 people now, and all of you. And not a single person has had the same reaction to that, which I think is particularly accurate to talking about incidents and incident stories. So normally when one goes off on a journey to analyze incidents, they run into interesting things. These are the typical things that you run into when you first start talking about incidents. These are the usual shallow subjects, the sort of starting point of the talk. Other people have talked quite a bit about these already. I'm not going to talk about them. Every other talk I do, I talk about these things. So I don't get to do it this time. And if you want to learn a lot more about these things, I made a pamphlet. Is David here so I can throw it at him? No? Does anybody want one? Yeah, okay. Well, they're at the booth too. So you can go read about all of this stuff and all the data that I've collected to convince people not to use these data. We're not going to do that. But I do also want to encourage you and convince you that it's possible to not do that. So I have to do all the clicking on this. Little Prezi, why are you so fussy? Still not getting the audio. AV problems. Let's go back and see if we can restart it. You can read, but I really want everyone to hear. Somehow I knew we were going to have problems. Of course. It worked earlier.
It's going to go through the headphones now. Okay. Let's try it again.
Are we good now or no?
Should be.
Okay, hold on. Let's try this again. Oh, okay. I want to convince you it's possible to escape this land. The clicker's not working. Why? Why? Ah, come on. Oh. The whole presentation stems on this working. I'm having a presentation incident. Oh, it worked when we tested it earlier.
It was either costing
Okay.
a lot to run,
All
or
right.
may
Let's see if
be
we can get this to
at
start
a high
over.
risk to fall over again,
Hopefully
the
rest of
aggregate
them will.
wasn't really telling us anything.
So I want you to try to
Looking at mean time
Yep.
to recovery and trying
All right, folks. You're the first time I've ever done this, so
to learn anything just from that is like looking at the presents under the Christmas tree and trying to guess what's in them.
we're going to start this over again. Here we go.
When is it over? What are we going to decide is an incident is over? Are we recovered? Because oftentimes you're mitigated, but you still have a degraded system that is either costing a lot to run or may be at a high risk to fall over again. The aggregate wasn't really telling us anything. Looking at mean time to recovery and trying to learn anything just from that is like looking at the presents under the Christmas tree and trying to guess what's in them.
So Spotify is one of many organizations, or at least this team in Spotify, that are sort of stepping away from these shallow kinds of metrics. They found they're not particularly useful to them. So you have to get off the boat now, and you have to go deeper. So this is you all, our intrepid incident investigators or analysts or what have you, going to spelunk the depths. And I want to give you some examples of what that looks like. Because the benefit of moving beyond these shallow metrics and collecting stories, incident stories, is that they contain so much more information, things that you saw that Laura Nolan was talking about, things that we heard about yesterday. So rich socio-technical types of information that you simply don't get from below the line, if you will. And they convey multiple different perspectives, sometimes conflicting perspectives. And honestly, that's not a bad thing when you find that out. And we've heard a lot already about patterns, but here they are again. These types of stories help you reveal and connect themes and patterns amongst your incidents. And good stories zoom in and out and have different time spaces that paint a larger picture of your whole system. And I want you to hear some of those things that people have managed to do.
In terms of telling these kind of stories, it serves a purpose that is not really served by anything else that we do, even postmortems or even documentation, because this is basically memory. We have memory as people, and we share that memory across people by telling stories. We need to do that as engineers. And the only way that we can actually do it with people across different organizations by writing it down and having that collective memory grow.
I just really love telling stories. I think storytelling is one of the fundamental ways that humans interact, learn from each other, support each other. There are so many cool incident stories out there that aren't being told. My motivation as I was going through this process was to set an example and to say, hey, this is one way that incident stories can be written, can be told. I really was hoping, and I still am hoping, that the folks at other places will come across this set and say, oh, I could write a story like this.
And I want to talk about this Reddit incident. I have a link to it in the end. This was when Wall Street bets happened. Does anybody kind of remember that? The whole context of that, right? So some pretty wild machinations and short selling, and it just nuked Reddit. just took it down. And Courtney sort of rallied folks from his team to write about this. And his inspiration to do that was a Slack incident report written by Laura Nolan. And I don't have that in here, but that's exactly what he says in the podcast. I read these incident stories that this other person had done so well, and it inspired me to do the same, and so on and so forth. So the more that you all do this, then the more you inspire and give confidence to other people that they could do the same. Okay, that's the pointer. Don't do that.
Going through the cast of characters is really interesting because I think that's how we wound up in this situation. 2 years ago, we had one Kafka expert on the team. And then I started doing some Kafka work. And then the Kafka expert left the company. So it was just me for a little while. And then The platform engineering manager made the decision of, okay, we think we're going to try this new tiered storage thing from Confluent. Let's sign the contract. Let's figure out the migration. And we thought we had accomplished all of it. And then we had one engineer from our team sign up to finish the migration, right? Like, it's already running in dog food, make it run in prod. And then when we started having a bunch of incidents,
there was this transfer of knowledge, and sometimes pieces fall on the ground, and that's where some of the surprises come from. It's not something for which you can have quantitative metrics, right? It's something you have qualitative metrics for, which is, do you feel nervous around that? Is this something that makes you afraid? And getting a feeling for the feelings that people have towards the system is how you kind of figure that one out. Someone who feels extremely confident are not necessarily going to take extra precautions for the sake of them, but everyone was sort of walking on eggshells around that part of the system and feeling or self-imposing pressure about the uptime because people take pride in the work they do.
So I want to highlight this set of quotes because this incident report from Honeycomb and then the subsequent conversation I had with them about it revealed so much. I was at 4 or 5 people in that 2 sentences that Liz said about who had been involved. And so we've got roles, we've got potential issues in handover communication, we've got gaps in how information is shared, and things fall on the floor, as Fred said. And then you've got other like super rich details in here around assumptions that people make, expertise that they build, the way that they know that systems are spooky, pressures, right? Other kinds of pressures. Pressures, in this case, personal pressures. This is an interesting one when we talk about pressures in systems, which we do talk about a lot. This one's a fascinating one to me because it doesn't always show up in our system diagrams. But Fred here is actually talking about emotional, social, personal pressures because people take pride in the work that they do. So other things that these kinds of deeper incident stories can tell you. Here we're back into theme and pattern.
The good thing was that we could kind of tell from the pattern of the crashes that it was something that was going into some type of kind of exponential backoff. And I think having run this system for a while now, one of the patterns that you realize is our async work that exists in Google PubSub. When you fail to ACK a PubSub message, you'll go into a standard exponential backoff pattern. So the fact that we were seeing subsequent crashes come maybe 2 minutes and then 3 minutes, 4 minutes, that sort of thing from each one of the retries, that gives you a pretty strong gut check that this is probably coming from some PubSub messages. And then you start looking for where have we got kind of an errant PubSub message across all of our subscriptions. So you start looking through them and going, cool, the subscriptions that I know I'm okay to clear, I'm going to start clearing. And we were just basically going through those and trying to clear them out so that we could get rid of the bad message, which presumably was the thing that was being retried each time and bringing it down.
So here we have expertise developed over time, patterns that arise from developing that expertise, strategies and tactics for dealing with those patterns. If anybody went to David Wood's talk, that may have sounded all David Woods and academic, but here it is in reality, in clear form of an incident that I just talked with an engineer from Incident IO at. This is Lawrence Jones. Let's look at, I think, one more thing that we get from this. Why are you doing that? This is just the best presentation format.
While we're going through them, we sort of by osmosis noticed some stuff. And that is another sort of unstated reason to do this. From a perspective of a squad that's trying to help people be better at being reliable and resilient, and they're building their systems, we certainly got a good, broad picture of what's going well and what's not.
So Clint's talking about a multi-incident review. Actually, he's talking about an entire year's worth of incident review that he and folks from his team conducted. And one of the things they realized from that was that MTTR was bullshit and wasn't helping them. and then they discovered some very interesting and other broad patterns. I know a few of these things that I can't entirely tell you about. I hate to say it, but I will say that I think Spotify is doing an incredible job of developing themes, of finding and identifying and tracking themes across their incidents. So while I can't show you that as concretely. I can tell you it's possible, and large organizations with huge customer bases are doing that kind of work. So I want to talk about some of the other things that you start to discover when you tell deeper incident stories, when you start going into the depths and beyond sort of the shallow metrics. Here we have our good friend Rasmussen, which many of you probably know. How many people have seen this diagram? Some. Okay. The first thing that I just want to point out is I didn't realize this until now, but it looks like a fish. Metaphor is just really holding up today. So this is from a paper, I have the link to it at the end, from Rasmussen. This is actually Richard Cook's adaptation of Rasmussen, which is just we took a lot of the detail out. And this was the first time I saw this diagram, this representation, was when Richard Cook presented it at Velocity. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I did not understand it. I didn't get it. And the other day, Jason from Indeed asked me, when did you get it? And I was like, well, somewhere between then and more recently. It depends. If you haven't seen this before and it doesn't make complete sense, you're not like, aha, I will go off and go forth and use this, that's okay. This one takes, you have to have experience with this in the wild, but it will show up. You will find it, and I want to give you a couple of examples. But the general Rasmussian principle, right, is that we have a couple of different boundaries. We've got this boundary of financial sort of boundary. If your lights are on, if you're selling products, if you're pushing bits, you're within that boundary, right? You're operating. And then we have this sort of human performance boundary down here. Like if people aren't falling asleep and burning out and crashing and going on sick leave indeterminately and whatever or not, you're not passing this boundary. So you have an operating point that is somewhere within here. And we tend to operate right near this other boundary, which is the acceptable performance boundary. And it is actually the nature of our business to operate as close to that boundary as we possibly can at all times, depending on which things are pushing us in that direction. It can be a variety of these. And this operating point is dynamic. It moves around, and it honestly moves around in what Richard called sort of Brownian ways, if you're at all a somewhat physics nerd. And so the thing that I really want to talk about is you think you know where that is. And then when you have an incident, you realize you don't, right? You don't know where you are operating. And that alone is an incredibly valuable insight from an incident. But what's more interesting is when you can start to understand what pushed you there, or how were you there, or how close were you there, or why were you there. So I was talking about the operating point being dynamic.
So that was giving us kind of, this looks bad. It was also part of a piece of the code base that we had seen an error come from, I think, the day prior. So we were already feeling a bit suspect about this. We didn't quite know how it would have happened because we were under the assumption at this point that any errors that were returned by these subscription handlers, regardless of whether or not they panicked, that the app should proceed and continue. So as it happened, that was an incorrect assumption. At this point, you already don't have a consistent viewpoint of exactly what's causing the incident. So you start ditching some of the rules that you think you have in mind because it's logically inconsistent with what you see that is actually happening in production. So
this is a delightful example of what David was talking about yesterday, which is reconfiguring, right? Like reconstructing, reassessing, reevaluating reality and trying to update what is actually happening based on that. And I really loved that example from Lawrence at incident.io. And then we have this one.
It's trading one mechanism of safety for another. We traded off having the disk buffer, but in exchange, we lost the ability to go back in time to replay more than a few hours of data, whereas previously we had 20 hours of data on disk.
That's the concept of safety margin. Ideally, we had like 24 to 48 hours of buffer so that if the core time series storage has an issue where it corrupts data, then we have the ability to take a bit of time to fix the bug and replay the data and lose none of the customer information. This speaks to the expertise of people operating the system in that they understand these kinds of safety margin and measures that are put in place in some areas. When something unexpected happens, the people who have a good understanding of where all that stuff is located are able to tweak the controls and change the buttons and turn some demand down to give the capacity for some other purpose. That's one of the reasons why when we talk about socio-technical system, the social aspect is so important. Everything that's codified and immutable is tweaked and adjusted by the people working in the system.
So that was Liz Fong-Jones and Fred Hebert from Honeycomb, neither of whom are here, and Fred really wished he was here, so I'm glad we could at least have his voice on the stage. And when people ask me for exemplars of good incident reports, I always mention Laura's work at Slack, and then I often mention Fred, his work at Honeycomb. And what you're hearing here is developing an awareness of safety boundaries, and then also the expertise that we as the people, when things go pear-shaped, when things go solid, we step in and we are able to pull things away from those boundaries, right? We are able to make those kinds of adjustments, and then you're seeing that system, you're seeing your role in it, you're seeing how the people provide that expertise and pull you back from that unsafe boundary. Okay, so the other things that you start to see when you go past the data of the specific sort of clear incident data are near misses. And you start to develop a sense for these, and hopefully over time you develop the ability to actually investigate those as well. So because they reveal all kinds of things, almost more of these kinds of things that we talk about from incident analysis. So gaps in knowledge, communication breakdown, pockets of expertise, misaligned mental models, cultural forces, assumptions, all these things we talk about. Near misses give you the chance to look at those without all the angst and terror of actual incidents, right? And they give you this space that's truly blameless, if you will, almost. You know, like it's a success, right? Like what happened? Like how did we manage to not reach that boundary of unacceptable performance? And I just want to give a couple of examples of people who've discovered these as well, and talking about those. So I think we've got Fred again.
We had other ones that had to do with bad deployment, where the script to deploy that we thought we had didn't work the way exactly we thought it did, and caused this sort of cascading failure or near failure. And in this case, I recall people were on a call, specifically Martin and Dean, and then a few other onlookers, and I came and watched. But Liz made a point of remaining back on chat and monitoring the update status situations. And this was a great move because there's also a sort of semi-explicit policy to avoid heroes at the company, one person concentrating all the knowledge. And in the first one where we had the 99% near outage, Liz was there, explained to Martin and Dean the sort of commands to be running about that one. And when the other incident happened, Liz stayed back and let them do their thing, but still keep an eye from afar without coming in and saying, I know how to fix this one, I'm going to fix it for you. For me, that was the sort of transfer of knowledge that happened over the course of multiple incidents.
What I love about this one was this is like a pattern about a pattern, right? Somewhere along the line, Honeycomb discovered that you could have these overly defended pockets of expertise, if you will, or hero types of behaviors. And so they've developed a pattern to try to counteract that. And so this is purely really the social side of this socio-technical system. And I really loved this detail. I wish I could have played more of it, of Liz, of talking to Liz about why she chose this and what the intention was of staying back. But that was a learned behavior from having had other problems with other incidents where you have these entrenched pockets of knowledge. So I really loved that detail from that. And this is the only one I don't have audio for, but I just wanted to talk about, this is just an organization that found these types of deeper incident insights. So I'll just read Ray's quote here. We realized that this was a failure mode that didn't line up with our mental model of how the job system breaks down. This institutional memory is a cultural and historical force shaping the way we view problems and their solutions. No surface level incident data is going to tell you that. right? So the last thing I want to talk about, as I'm about to run out of time, I had written this before I saw David's talk, and so that made me, this is hard work. And I want to acknowledge that, right? And maybe we'll see the big cheesy iceberg metaphor when we come back down to it, but at the depth of this is us, right? All of the people trying to do this work. And it is hard, but it's so worth doing because we are building this community of practice. We are shining a light on not just the value of this work for us as people, but for organizations, for companies that support life in a day-to-day basis as we know it now. And most importantly, as far as I see it, by doing this work, by talking about this work, by sharing this work, we are supporting each other and caring for each other. And so just really quickly, I want to just give a couple examples of that.
It's really helpful for day-to-day practices of engineers, people who are just trying to do work to understand how we can solve these problems and learn from different areas of how to make this work easier for ourselves. I know that for me personally, it felt like I was an island trying to say, hey, we could be doing this differently. This doesn't have to be so hard. And primarily making it feel like you're not alone. There are other people who are trying to make the same kind of progress, and we can share, pool our resources and help each other out.
That was Emily from Jelly.
Coming out of that, the incident, the first initiative I took on was, hey, we're starting to see a lot of coordination needed among a bunch of teams. And this can't be the same 3 or 4 people. We need to train more people to find these connections and to make them. And so we now have an incident commander rotation comprised of individuals that we would like to expand to the broader org, which is the idea that anyone can become an incident commander. The biggest value I see is safety. Help incident responders feel safe, especially as we are, as an org, scaling very rapidly. So we've been running this program for a few months now and starting to collect some data on how useful it is, how much safer do people feel. I think if we had the program in place for our Wall Street bets, I'm not sure that things would have necessarily been resolved more quickly, but I do think psychologically folks would have felt more comfortable and cared for in a very stressful time.
Yeah, and MTTR is not going to give you that. So that's my talk. I run the Void, the Verica Open Incident Database. I'd like you to think of the Void as a refuge for all of your stories. I will care for them and curate them and help tell the world about them. So we have a booth. I'll be there if you want to come talk about any more of this. We have a pamphlet. Thanks a lot, David. And because I feel like it's necessary, we all do these things. If you want any of the things that were in there, I have references at the end of the slide. I forgot to put the reference to the Nietzsche stuff at the beginning. Sorry, but I'll put that in there at the end. And that's my talk.